back, everyone, and welcome, Mary Sue.
Hello.
Hello, thanks so much for being on the show. All right, so we are talking about how to create a preliminary college list. So when should people start thinking about that? What should their initial moves be? I mean, I know my opinion, and by the way, second grade is not what either of us are going to recommend. Although, like, do not start talking about Stanford in elementary school.
Right.
Not a good idea. But like,
Yep.
realistically, on the early end, when should people start thinking about it? What can they do to sort of help save some time down the road and some stress without actually adding stress in the moment too much?
Yeah. So, true story. When I worked in the Barnard admissions office, I did actually get a call from a parent of a 3-year-old who who wanted to know. That's too early. But I think that the admissions process, can feel really overwhelming, and there's so many college choices out there, and it can feel like how do we even know how to start this process? And so my advice to families is to maybe start the process in 10th grade, end of 10th grade, beginning of 11th grade, maybe that summer in between, but very casually, not sort of with an expectation of every college we're going to visit is going to be on that eventual list. It's more, let's just see kind of what's out there. I think that a lot of high school students form their initial opinions about college from their friends and family members and from older people that they know who have gone to college or are considering college. And truly, they may not know what it's like to be on a college that's, a 2,000 person college in a suburban or rural environment versus a 30,000 person college that's in the middle of New York City, for example. So just kind of seeing what's out there and seeing what does a college environment look like, I think is a good way to start the process. And that's how I advise the families I work with, is, maybe just start with 3 to 5 visits, but particularly pick schools that are different from each other so that, it's not just seeing every school that has similar characteristics, but challenge your assumptions a little, try a few different types of environments, and then reflect on what did you like about those schools, what didn't you like, what stood out about you, what stood out about them, and also realize that, if you do start the process kind of end of 10th grade, you may mature and change your preferences over the last 2 years of high school. Having worked at a women's college, we often found that students in 10th grade didn't always want to look at women's colleges initially, and then in 12th grade decided they did want to look at women's colleges, and that's okay. So it is okay for those preferences to evolve, but I think start the process just by kind of sampling what's out there.
Yeah, and I tell students, I mean, personally, when I send students out there early, I try and push them to not think like yes, no about the colleges. There's a certain impulse to want to just make a decision. I tell them instead to, like, think about, even if you think you don't like a school, try and find something that you do like about it. Like, push yourself to think about the different elements, different qualities of schools. The other thing too is that sometimes students really like, I mean, you bring this up with the women's colleges, students have a hypothesis, they have like, they want a huge public university that's co-ed, that sounds like more fun to them. And then like they visit those schools and they're like, oh my God, or some of them are like, oh my God, this is wonderful. And I love it. And I want to be one in a crowd. And then other students are like, I'm terrified and this is not what I want to do at all. I had one student call a school like that disgusting, which I was like, that's a little harsh. Like, let's stay away from those kinds of adjectives about any. But I think what he was just responding to was he had been used to this very interactive environment and he felt alienated by it. So
I've had students be surprised when they visit schools that when they do challenge their assumptions a little bit. I had a student who really thought they'd be interested in a large public university that was in their state. And then when they went to visit the school, they realized that it's such an expansive campus that you actually do have to kind of take a bus between parts of the campus in order to get around. And that was something that they may not have noticed unless they had gone for a visit. So I think that those visits, hopefully public health wise, we can keep doing those visits and but they're so important to kind of just see the many varieties of colleges that are
Mm-hmm.
available.
And even get a nice visual on the student body, like try
Hmm.
and get a sense of whether this is going to feel comfortable to you.
Hmm.
And I know that when people are watching this, they're like, well, what about the major? It's all about the major and the academics. And I'm like,
Right.
absolutely. But so many good colleges in this country that you almost don't need
Right.
to worry about that. Like it's kind
Yeah.
of the first thing that everybody worries about. I was on the phone with a mother and her student, her daughter today, and they were like, well, can you give us a list of the best pre-med colleges? And I said,
Mhm.
that would
No.
be a couple thousand. Like there's just so many
Right.
good options that what you need to do is, it's great that you like biology. You're going to really need to narrow it down by other things because most colleges have biology. And
Hmm.
if they have it, they do a good job at it.
Yep.
So these are the other things, look at the culture, look at these other things. And I know that it was very kind of confusing to this
Hmm.
family. Like they thought they could just narrow it down through pre-med and
Right.
biology.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think that I did a study in the admissions office that I worked in, and where we looked to see how many students actually declared a major that was what they had put on their admissions application. And we found out that 75% of our students changed their mind. And
Mhm.
I think it was, for one particular small liberal arts college, but I think that that's pretty normal for students to, change their mind in college. And I went into college as a math major and came out as a psych major. So
Mhm.
I think, picking it, had I picked colleges only on their math departments, I probably would have, you know, then narrowed in too quickly and not looked at schools that were a good personal fit for me. Um, but I would also say, there are a few majors that are pretty particular that you're not going to find at every college. Some things like physical therapy or aerospace engineering, or sometimes like really specialty areas like that. That if you have a strong interest, maybe you want to be looking at schools that have that as an option,
Mhm.
but don't just evaluate the school based on that one program, because your experience, even if you major in that, is going to be far more than just what classes are in your major. It's going to be the social life, the living experiences, what the curriculum is like, which is always astonishes me how many students will come back from tours and do research and things. And I'll say, so what's the curriculum like at the school that you like? And they, oh, I hadn't really looked at that. I'm like, well, that's actually like a major part of your
Right.
college experience, is whether it's a pretty flexible and open curriculum or a very rigid curriculum that's set. So, that's a good question to ask. Maybe not major specific, but what else do I have to take? I think is a really important question in
Mhm.
that process.
Yeah, I think like this is part of where I think we're always trying to educate families. It's not
Hmm.
about good or bad. It's about, is it a match for you? Does it
Hmm.
fit you? And so, University of Chicago is a great school. There's no question
Right.
about it. Is it the right match for every student? I mean, huge core curriculum, very, very intellectual, shall we say, nerdy environment. It's just not going to be right for everybody.
Hmm.
So yeah, try and like look into, I mean, I think looking into the academics is a really interesting thing to do, because also not all majors are the same.
Hmm.
I talk to a lot of business majors who think the curriculum is going to be exactly the same from school to school. And it's
Hmm.
like, no, some are going to be very finance, accounting, sort of more math heavy. Others, you take one math class and you're done, and
Hmm.
you can do more of almost a marketing focus. So think
Hmm.
about who you are and what you want, and then actually
Right.
read through. It's a lot of information though, like I
Yeah.
really understand how that's tough. And I think that's why I always want students to start with some of those gut impressions too.
Hmm.
Like collect the impressions, like you said. I
Hmm.
preferred this, I preferred this. Don't use the example of my student where you decided like something was just terrible, but figure out what your preferences are and then start to try and like talk to people to try and find out colleges that fit most of those. You're not going to
Hmm.
have a perfect college. You may think it is, but you
Right.
won't. No college is perfect. Just like
Right.
no person is perfect, no college is
Right.
perfect.
Right.
Collect those impressions and then try and find the best matches for those.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that um, thinking about it in that sort of way of coming up with kind of your must-have part of your list, your nice to have, and
Mhm.
then kind of your deal breakers. So are there things that um, you're sure that if they are on a campus, they're just not a fit for you? Those are the deal breaker kind of things. And they have to be legitimate things. I've certainly had a number of students come back and say, I didn't like what the tour guide was wearing, and that's why I'm taking the college off the
Right.
list. It's like, well, that's not really a reason to select or cross out a college, is, that one impression of that one particular student, although the tour guide might be great. But I think that, um, again, looking at it more from the sort of bigger picture perspective, what did I like? What are things that were good? And realizing that a school is not going to check every single box. You will have to have some compromises in that process. And thinking about what are those areas where you can compromise, and what are the areas where you really can't.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, on that list, I would say do think about selectivity of
Hmm.
institutions. At the preliminary level, that doesn't need to be a primary focus. I think that
Hmm.
comes later.
Hmm.
But don't just, if you go to Boston, don't just visit Harvard and MIT,
Hmm.
visit and I mean these days Boston University, Boston College, they're Northeastern, they're all highly selective, but
Hmm.
maybe take a trip to Worcester and
Hmm.
also visit College of Holy Cross if you really
Right.
like Boston College, try and like
Right.
diversify out. If you go to DC, don't just visit Georgetown, visit GW, visit George
Hmm.
Mason, maybe drive down to Richmond and visit University of Richmond. Like try and
Hmm.
don't just visit the schools that sort of everybody talks about all the time.
Hmm.
I really do think it helps too when people realize, I mean, literally there are what, 4,000 colleges?
Hmm.
If and I think I would say that I personally know hundreds that are kind of amazing
Hmm.
places. So keep
Yeah.
that in mind and don't just visit the ones that pop up in every conversation.
Right.
That's one of the bigger things to do. The other thing that I was thinking, and I'm going to sort of piggyback on the conversation I just had with Lori, is I do think it makes sense, even preliminarily, to have a really honest conversation about finances.
Hmm.
Not that you should say, we're not even visiting that college, it's too expensive, because there might be scholarships, but have an honest conversation about what actually can be spent, you
Right.
know?
Yeah, I think that financial fit is important. Having gone through this process very recently myself with my now college freshman daughter, that was a conversation that we had pretty early on of, your list is going to include a mix of some private schools, and we think you might get some merit scholarships at some of these private schools. But it's also going to have some in-state public universities as well. And so thinking about it from a financial fit is a good idea fairly early on in the process. But I would also say, don't rule out a school just because of the sticker price. In that there may be scholarships available. I've certainly talked to families who said we're not looking at any private universities because they're just too expensive. And I think my finance colleagues can talk more about that. But there are more opportunities there. But I think having that conversation with your student fairly early on about, yes, affordability is going to be a part of this process, so that at the end of the process, and I've had this happen with lots of families, if one school, comes out as $20,000 more than another school, and parents are sort of saying, okay, you need to go at this more affordable option, it doesn't feel like a um, sudden blindsiding of the student, where they might have thought that wasn't really a factor. So
Mm-hmm.
I think have those conversations early on and ongoing in the process of not only what is the right personal, academic, social fit for the student, but also what's the right financial fit for the
Mm-hmm.
family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is sort of a tangent, but one of the things I actually have started recommending with some families is
Mhm.
set times when you'll talk about college, so the kid doesn't feel this your
Right.
student doesn't feel blindsided in general by
Hmm.
constant discussions of
Yeah.
colleges. Set a particular time, and then you can talk about like all the wonderful things, the harder things.
Hmm.
Is the student getting their work done? Like have that broader,
Yeah.
set a time to have that discussion, but don't waylay them with it when they're trying to get ready for school in the morning.
Right.
It's like
Right.
it's a very stressful way to go about
Yes.
things.
Yes.
So we've talked a lot about kind of initial research. Like let's talk a little bit about how you would do that research. Like we mentioned visiting,
Hmm.
but what are some other options? Like what are some things to look for when you're visiting and when you're kind
Hmm.
of just, in other ways when you can't visit as well?
I would say use the resources that the school has on their website and on their social media channels. Um, sometimes even just looking up clubs, different clubs at the school and their Instagram pages is helpful to kind of see, yeah, sort of the vibrancy of some of their activities. Um, but I would also say, when you visit the campus, if you can visit, try and go on an official tour, information session if available, but also talk to some folks, not just with the admissions office, if you can, get a coffee at the local coffee shop, strike up some conversations with some students as well. Um, but there are other third party kind of websites that I would recommend. I like, the College Board has a pretty good college search engine called Big Future. There's one called College Navigator, which is through the National Center for Education Statistics. And those can be good places to find out things like cost of attendance, graduation rates, retention rates, ethnic and gender breakdowns of a school. Some of that data can be helpful in kind of comparing different schools. There are also other third party, I would almost call them like college review sites, like Niche. It's kind of like Yelp reviews for colleges. There's going to be lots of good information if you look at it at a bigger picture level, but there's always going to be someone who just failed a final and gets on there grumpily and kind of types away about how horrible the school is too. And so um, look at it kind of big picture as another resource, but looking at all the pieces. Are there other things that you think of as being good
Well,
resources?
I actually think social media is great, like
Mhm.
especially if you've got a student who's particularly interested in some kind of social activity, like
Mhm.
or extracurricular. I worked with a student once who really, um, cared deeply about community service. So I was like, well, check, there are some schools that are known for it, right?
Mhm.
Like Marist, it's a huge part of the
Right.
campus culture. And then some schools, every school does service, but it's not
Mhm.
going to be a passion of a
Right.
huge percentage of the student body. I think social media and looking for clubs and then following those social media, seeing
Mhm.
how active different organizations are can be a really good way to do it, absolutely.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So those all give you, hopefully give everybody some ideas. Any last thing? I mean, I guess I would just say, especially in the opening days, like stay open, like
Mhm.
don't dismiss a college also because somebody like a friend of a friend said she didn't like it.
Right.
That person isn't you,
Right.
right? You might be a totally different person and may be perfect for you.
Yeah. And I would say my last advice to parents is take a big piece of duct tape and stick it over your mouth on those visits, because what your impressions are of the college, which might be 25 or 30 years old from when
Mhm.
you knew somebody who went there, might be very different than the current state of that school. So kind of let your student come to their own opinions and thoughts about the school first before you discuss it as a family.
Yeah, just a closing comment. When I was applying to college, USC and NYU were safety schools
Hmm.
for me. Not anymore.
Yeah. Yep.
So, all right. Thank you so much, Mary Sue.
Thanks for having me, Sally.
All right. And thank you to Jamie Ciafalo and Lori Peltier. Be sure to tune in next week when Ian Fisher will be talking to Andrew Cohen, executive at LinkedIn, about how high school students can best leverage and use LinkedIn when they're researching colleges. I'm pretty excited for this. I actually want to like listen. I'm definitely going to listen in on this one. He will then be answering listener questions with Shannon Vasconcelos from our finance team. And last, don't forget to listen in every Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific.